Thank you so much. Honored to present today. This is an overview of my work in progress. I really appreciate thoughts you have. This is a part personal memoir, part academic book, and I'm sort of struggling and working through how you tell personal stories, but try to teach larger academic lessons. So any thoughts you'd have, whether it's in the Q&A or maybe we can even communicate privately afterwards, that would be great. And I just have to give a shout out to Ken Marcus, who is here. And as you'll hear this, as the story goes on, he has supported me through both of these experiences, and it's great to see you here. Kettleman City sits just about halfway between Los Angeles and San Francisco on busy Interstate 5. It's best known as a gas, food, and bathroom stop on the long 7-hour drive between Southern and Northern California. On one particular day in my academic career, though, it seemed to hold some sort of magical, transformative power when it came to how I was perceived as an identified and activist Jewish faculty member on the college campus. For 7 years prior to that fateful drive, I taught on the faculty of Pasadena City College, a 2-year community college located just north of downtown Los Angeles. When several of my colleagues shared their plans to turn a lesson on the Holocaust into a community college version of the Jerry Springer reality TV show, I pushed back in what became a 3-year fight against campus anti-Semitism. Before it ended, local and regional newspapers picked up the story, while 2 agencies of the federal government opened inquiries into campus Jewish life. At its worst, the campus newspaper ran an op-ed labeling me a, quote, self-hating leftist Jew, unquote, and calling for my firing. When the head of an FBI designated domestic terrorist organization taped his business card to my door, I went to campus police for an escort. And when they refused, I resigned my tenure, which of course at that moment proved meaningless, and headed to SF State. After that 400-mile drive from LA, I arrived on the SF State campus and started unpacking my books, only to discover that in just one day, I'd somehow morphed from a self-hating leftist Jew to a right-wing Zionist colonial imperialist. Kettleman City, of course, lacked that sort of transformative power. Campus anti-Semitism, though, certainly does. A Tale of Two Campuses, Jews, Identity Politics, and the Golden State unwinds that drive up Interstate 5, exploring how anti-Semites from each side of the political aisle need to typecast Jews as their enemy, even when those qualities contradict one another. It dives deep into one of the most vexing dynamics in contemporary American Jewish life: the intersection of Jewish identity and the politics of higher education on the college campus. It compares and contrasts my campus experiences in order to address 3 related questions in American Jewish life. How can we best understand the dynamics of anti-Semitism from both the political right and left? Why have colleges and universities, otherwise dedicated to the advancement of knowledge, become fertile soil for anti-Semitism to grow? And finally, how has the left's rejection of Zionism made campus life and social justice work so complicated for Jews? And I'll add here that there's a question to what extent I'm going to make this a California-centered book, since both my experiences are here, so I'm working on that. The PCC campus anti-Semitism story began when one of my colleagues approached me in the hall between classes with what seemed exciting news. The humanities block program faculty, a group of 7 professors teaching a combined class of 100 students, had invited Irv Rubin, the head of the Jewish Defense League, as a featured speaker on the Holocaust. Rubin, while a well-known national Jewish leader, lacked any sort of academic or educational training. Instead, he was a right-wing ideologue, advocating violence if necessary to defend American Jews against the threat of another Holocaust. Yet the rules of the academy gave my colleagues in the humanities block program the right to invite whomever they wished as a visiting professor. Rubin enjoyed the latitude to share his story and perspectives with the students. But the academic freedom question devolved quickly into anti-Semitism, when the inviting faculty shared the real reason for the guest lecture, as one of them told me they meant to, quote, titillate, unquote, students by having Rubin, quote, make an ass out of himself, unquote, with his well-known antics. Rubin had appeared on Jerry Springer, and faculty designed his visit to recreate that TV show in their lecture hall, only they never shared this motivation with Rubin. When I expressed concern, my colleagues made their views quite clear. I had violated their right to academic freedom by pressuring them to rescind Rubin's invitation. My motives grew in their minds from a leftist political agenda, more than academic, pedagogic, or Jewish communal concerns. From the perspectives of my Christian colleagues, my own Jewish identity suffered too. In their view, I needed to be more concerned about anti-Semitism than I professed. I needed to recast myself in Rubin's image, since he better understood what it meant to be Jewish in America. And just beneath the surface, and I say this to my academic colleagues, I was also a Jewish man telling Christian faculty how to teach, then a junior faculty member pushing back against senior faculty, and a research PhD trained scholar telling community college faculty they weren't worthy. And it got ugly fast. As the first half of the book will describe, it was an awkward, unexpected, and strange intra-Jewish experience. I fought against the mistreatment of Rubin on campus, even as I disagreed with his worldviews. My colleagues in the administration rewrote the episode as nothing more than a political fight between two Jews, ignoring the layering of misrepresentation they were committing. When anti-Semitism erupted on my right-wing campus, most of my colleagues of color, as well as women, empathized with my experience and joined in an interracial, interfaith, and cross-gender coalition to call out anti-Jewish discrimination, as well as racism, sexism, and anti-gay attitudes. They saw all our oppressions as linked. They respected a white Jewish man for my willingness to fight, and they launched a community-wide effort to address the plight of marginalized communities. I was gifted with a deep dive into what Dr. Milton Brown, an African-American sociologist of race and ethnicity who mentored me through this all, what he called invisibility, playing, of course, on Ralph Ellison's famous novel. My colleagues welcomed me to their struggle, walked with me down a treacherous path, and let me know they had my back. Learning from them and with them, I reflected both on the privilege I should have enjoyed as a white male Jew on an American college campus, and the challenges I faced when anti-Semitism took those privileges away. My dean, a white Christian woman who took a public stand against anti-Semitism, faced a college president and a board of trustees that eventually fired her for her defense of campus Jews. Dr. Brown endured arrest by campus police during his class in front of his students on false charges that he threatened a white female faculty member. At a right-wing school, it seemed, leftists sought alliances and solidarity with one another, universalizing their experiences of powerlessness and working together for change. For Jews, this followed a long-held tradition of white Jews joining forces with marginalized communities in search of a more inclusive, fair, and just society. As a white man teaching in a majority-minority school, 90% of PCC's undergraduates identified as students of color, I spent lots of time in self-reflection and learning. As each of us and all of us faced more intense retaliation, our bonds of personal friendship only strengthened. At its most impressive moment, dozens of community-based civil rights organizations grew our campus anti-Semitism fight into our region's first ever town hall meeting on diversity. By the end of the ordeal, I learned a whole lot about my obligation to leverage my whiteness, my maleness, and even my Jewishness to walk in solidarity with my colleagues. Just as they protected me, I needed to reciprocate their willingness to ally with me by placing myself between them and danger in return. Prior to my arrival at SF State, Hillel released a report naming it the most anti-Semitic campus in the country. Fortunately, then University President Robert Corrigan received the report and got to work, earning national praise for his dedication to the fight against campus anti-Semitism. Jewish advocacy groups pointed to SF State as a model for other universities to follow when anti-Semitism spiked on their campuses. A winner of our local Jewish Community Relations Council's Courageous Leader Award, Corrigan led with a strong moral compass, calling out violations of the university's mission and ensuring that each and every student enjoyed every opportunity to learn in an environment of both physical and educational safety. Despite this supportive university president, my larger campus reception did not go well. Trading a right-wing college for a left-wing university did not prove the panacea I hoped it would be. Even as the field of Jewish studies grew from calls for Black studies in the 1960s, tensions always existed between white Jewish scholars who viewed their academic work as dispassionate, objective critique, and ethnic studies scholars who called out the inherent privilege in that approach. Ethnic studies frame their own educational mandate with a pedagogy of the oppressed, leveraging their classrooms to fight systems of oppression that target communities of color. Leftist ambivalence about Jews, portrayed as white and privileged, bubbled right to the surface in my first few days and weeks in the new job. I came under fire for a central element of my Jewish identity, and one that never concerned the right-wing folks at PCC, Zionism. Rather than enjoying close collegial friendships with similarly minded progressive faculty, I lived a more isolated professional life at SF State. While I pretty much agreed with my new colleagues on virtually every political issue at stake, my support of the Jewish people's right to national self-determination challenged any sort of intergroup alliance. Campus political litmus tests, formal and informal, determined whether Jews could ally themselves with their leftist compatriots. Deny your Zionism, or you can't join the effort. During my first semester at SF State, I learned that campus Jews faced characterization as elites. Yet during my last semester at PCC, I suffered because I, as a Jew, wasn't a part of the school's elite. At SF State, the question of left-wing anti-Semitism came to the fore when our local Hillel chapter invited then Jerusalem Mayor Nir Barkat to speak on campus. None of us in campus Jewish life reacted with much surprise when Palestinian student groups and their allies showed up at the Barkat lecture ready to protest. We all but predicted there'd be chanting, sloganeering, and attempts to prevent the Jerusalem mayor from speaking. At SF State, pro-Israel events routinely attract anti-Israel protests. It's part of university life, of SF State life in particular, and it's all guaranteed by freedom of speech laws. But I did not imagine the mayor's visit would play out as it did. Sure enough, a group of student protesters arrived shortly after the official start time, sat in the back of the room, and waited for Barkat to begin speaking. Then Assistant Director of Hillel, Rachel Nielsen-Ralston, an SF State Jewish Studies graduate herself, took care to offer the protesters a heartfelt welcome. A Likudnik, Barkat stood as a controversial Israeli politician among many campus Jews as well. Rachel framed the afternoon as an opportunity for everyone present to engage, debate, question, and even disagree with the mayor. In fact, as a condition of speaking, the mayor agreed to an uncensored question and answer period with students after the talk. Rachel made a special invitation to the protesting students to challenge Barkat, and it didn't happen. Within minutes, the protesters began their chants. You are not welcome here. From the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. And for the third one, I will make it a direct quote, get the fuck off our campus, unquote. Typically, they'd be given some time to make their statement, and then campus police would let them know they needed to stop their interruption or leave the room. This time, campus police refused to take action. As the minutes passed, protest organizers brought loudspeakers into the enclosed space, making any sort of speech impossible to hear. The campus administrator in charge backed this violation of free speech, wrongly asserting that state and federal law protected the rights of protesters to shut down the event. As the mayor left the room an hour later, unable to speak, protesters cheered. And then, after he left the room, they turned away from the exit door, turned towards the Jewish students, and with fingers pointed, chanted to them, quote, get the fuck off our campus, unquote. It would be a demand that the university administration all but embraced. In the weeks and months that followed, the senior university administration refused to act, signaling to the protesters that they enjoyed the right to shout down the mayor. Emboldened by this tacit support, anti-Zionist students and their allies took even more brazen measures. After learning that Hillel had been invited to a Know Your Rights campus fair, designed to provide marginalized students with support in the wake of Trump's election, the event's coordinating committee, made up of students and faculty and professional staff, voted unanimously to uninvite the Jewish student group as retaliation for their invitation of Mayor Barkat to campus. As Zionists, they argued, the Hillel students should not be permitted entry. To cover their tracks, the organizing committee engaged in an elaborate cover-up, falsely claiming that lack of space rather than religious views inspired their action. Only the heroic gesture of a Good Samaritan and a subsequent university inquiry brought this secret plan to light. Even after an internal university investigation confirmed these findings, the university president refused any sort of public statement affirming the right of Jewish students to full participation in campus life. As this story leaked to the press, Dan Pine, a reporter for the local Jewish newspaper J Weekly, asked the SF state president if Zionists were in fact welcome on his campus. In a rambling paragraph-long reply, the university president equivocated, arguing that he did not believe in absolutes and couldn't commit to welcoming all Zionists to SF state. With this, massive public pressure mounted, and the university president published a retraction, affirming that SF state would welcome Zionists. And when this happened, a well-known Palestinian professor on our campus made a public pronouncement that the president's reversal amounted to, quote, a declaration of war, unquote. Within hours, chalked walkways with the slogan, Zionists are not welcome, and another said simply, fuck Hillel. Unlike my experience at PCC, no interracial alliance emerged after the shoutdown of the Jerusalem mayor, or the exclusion of Jewish students from a campus fair, or the anti-Semitic tropes voiced by the senior administration. Instead, the anti-Zionist culture of SF state at best isolated Jews, and at worst inspired calls for our removal from campus. An embrace of Zionism on this left-wing campus meant, in their minds, acquiescence to racism, as even the United Nations once declared. In a university dedicated to a social justice mission, standing in solidarity with Zionists meant abandoning the very purpose of a college degree. A few faculty took anti-Zionism a step further, and I know we're going to have a whole paper on this in a moment, embracing anti-normalization as their preferred tactic to marginalize campus Jews. According to this thinking, anyone who normalized Zionism aided and abetted the enemy. At SF State, this meant that enrolling in a course on Zionism, taught in the Department of Jewish Studies, for example, would be considered normalization and forbidden. Engaging in cross-cultural dialogue with Jewish students at our local Hillel chapter would normalize the enemy and therefore could not happen. With this thinking, the shoutdown made perfect academic and social justice sense. Listening to the mayor of Jerusalem or even allowing him to speak normalized Jewish nationalism. Therefore, it could not be allowed to happen. At its most extreme, one SF State student told our school newspaper he wouldn't even make eye contact with a person he thought might be a Zionist for fear that that would hurt the cause. Our Jewish undergraduates struggled in their repeated efforts to create cross-cultural dialogue and education. In one of the many ironies of campus Jewish life, identity politics and anti-Semitism, I responded to anti-normalization by retreating to the power and privilege of whiteness. Without support from my fellow progressive colleagues, I took the anti-Semitism fight to the highest levels of the administration, to community-based Jewish donors and to Jewish advocacy organizations. Because faculty and administration at a progressive, diverse, social justice-minded university would not ally themselves with Zionists, I found those who would. As a result, we built a coalition that looked very different than the one at PCC. Only when Jewish donors withheld millions of dollars and the leaders of the Bay Area's largest and most important Jewish community agencies expressed their upset in face-to-face meetings with the university president. Did Jewish faculty even get a hearing from the administration? Only by increasing our pressure with appeals to the system-wide university chancellor, newspaper coverage, and a successful lobbying trip to the state capitol in Sacramento could we keep campus anti-Semitism on the administration's mind. And I just want to add right here, Judea Pearl called me literally on my cell phone in the middle of this and said, what can I do to help? So thank you, Judea. Only the intervention of an off-campus advocacy organization filing lawsuits in both state and federal court brought this to an end, with a landmark legal settlement hours before jury selection was to begin. A few months later, the SF State University president, in the middle of the academic year, announced his retirement. A study of these two episodes, the dynamics that followed in each high-profile campus fight, and their ultimate resolutions offer a deep dive into the liminal nature of contemporary American Jewish life. Jews share attributes from both sides of the political aisle, but can no longer find a stable home in either. Jews have experienced this awkward status, part of the privileged class, while also suffering at times as a marginalized group in the United States. With this paradox, Jews can't win for losing, as each side of the political aisle marginalized Jews to serve their own needs. At my right-wing campus, faculty and administrators needed to typecast me as a self-hating leftist Jew to defend themselves against charges of anti-Semitism. At PCC, I had to be a subversive outsider, attempting to undermine all that was good about a college education. Jews were marginalized as weak, inept, and at best worthy of pity. Yet at my left-wing university, I became an oppressor, the ultimate insider whose connections to power and privilege would surely translate into communal harm unless I and those like me are stopped. At SF State, my colleagues needed me to be a right-wing Zionist in order to preserve their belief that Zionism and progressivism could never meet. Simply put, Jews endure rejection from the right for our leftism and from the left for our Zionism. At both schools, anti-Semitic tropes libel Jews as a sinister group plotting to bring ill to those around them. My political views, whatever they were, mattered less than did stereotypical depictions of me as a Jew bifurcated for each campus. Perhaps I should have embraced the suggestion of my friend Yitzhak Santis when he told me I should title this book, Stuck in the Middle with Jew. These two campus anti-Semitism fights underscore Jewish vulnerability in an otherwise accepting locale. How ironic it seems that a place dedicated to educating students about respecting people different from themselves would prove this fertile ground for anti-Jewish discrimination. The university should be a welcoming and comforting place for Jews. Academic training, it seems, should be the antidote to prejudice and discrimination. Education, the process by which we all learn about one another, should help us bridge religious and ethnic lines. This was not the story of any Kettleman City transformation. That rest stop in California's Central Valley did not actually affect my apparent morph from a radical Jew seeking revolutionary change in Pasadena to a Zionist apologist for an oppressive Israeli regime at SF State. But Kettleman City does offer an important, even if comical, frame for understanding Jews on the college campus, revealing a painful irony for campus Jews, who are perceived to be the enemy of both sides.